Geeky Saiyan Army, it's Kanan, and welcome to my very first video game review. And today's game that we're reviewing, unless you didn't read the title, is Final Fantasy VII Remake. I was actually very lucky to get a copy of this, because everybody started getting their checks from the government. And I had to go to 3 Walmarts to find a copy because, GameStop's closed and all that kind of stuff. And the third Walmart had 1 copy. So I grabbed a hold of it. So yeah, I'm going to go over a few things. Don't expect a big flashy review because I just want this to be simple. It is my first review, never done this before, so hopefully I do a good job at it. Also, huge spoiler warning. If you have not played this game yet, or if you're still in the middle of playing it, do not watch this video. Though do come back and watch, and if you're in any way curious about my thoughts on it. But if you've already beaten it, then hey, I'm glad you're in for the ride. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Me and Final Fantasy VII. So, before I get to the game, I feel like I need to tell my history a little bit with this particular game. Now, I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. I've played almost every single entry in the series, and there's only like a couple that I've never beaten. And, when I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time, it was not in '97 when it first came out. I actually bought it pretty late. By the time I bought it, it was one of the greatest hits, and it was $20. So yeah, it had and both Final Fantasy VIII and IX were out. So what happened was I got my PlayStation 1 very late because my parents couldn't afford one when they first came out. Plus, I think I believe the PS1 came out in '94, I believe, and I was like in kindergarten or first grade, so there was no way I could handle a system that advanced at that time. But who knows? I probably could have. And I had played other RPGs on the PS1's pretty much what introduced me to Japanese RPGs because. I said in the previous video, our video game story time video that we'd done like months ago. If you've not watched that, go take a look at it. It's pretty good story time video. My parents couldn't afford an SNES back in the day, so I missed out on Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and all that when they first came through. I eventually played them later, but by the time I played Final Fantasy VII, I had played games like Legend of Legaia, Chrono Trigger, Legend of Dragoon, and a bunch of other games. So my standards were pretty high for RPGs. So me and my parents were at Walmart one night, and and this is back when Walmart carried PlayStation 1 games still, because the PS2 was very close to coming out at this point, and they had Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and IX. All of them greatest hits, $20 a piece. My dad bought me all 3 of them that night. So when you have 3 very big games like that, all of them 3 discs or more, what I did, I sat down, I played the openings, I played a little bit of them, of each one, and, I would go with the one I liked most. Well, to tell you the truth, I liked IX the most. Final Fantasy IX to this day is still one of my top favorite Japanese RPGs, and I think it's it's in my top 5 for favorite Final Fantasy games. And the one I disliked the most out of the 3 was 8. Now, before you all come at me with pitchforks, you fans of 8, the only thing that makes me hate 8 is the junction system. I hate the junction system. 7, see, here's the thing. I played 7 for the first time at years after all of its hype had died down. So I didn't play it when it very first came out. So I didn't get that exposure to it that many others did when it very first came out. Because Final Fantasy VII, yes, it was a very revolutionary title, but by the time I had played it, I'd already played games who had done everything that 7 initially did. And tell you the truth, I didn't play and beat 7 until like the summer between my sophomore and junior year in high school. So this was like the summer of 2004. So yeah, I pretty much, that was my summer project for myself. Everyone says this is such a great game. It's the best game of all time. Blah blah blah. I'm gonna sit down this summer and beat it. And tell you the truth, a lot of you are gonna hate me for this, but I forced myself to beat it. I just was not that engrossed by it. Um, Story was interesting, but I just didn't think it was that great. Um, I didn't care about half of the characters. Like, the only ones I really liked were Tifa, uh, Aerith, and Yuffie. That was the three characters that I really liked the most in the original. And by that time, I had played Final Fantasy VI, and I thought Kefka was way more of a better villain than Sephiroth. And I don't know, I think I played it too late. And then years go by, and I've just always been kind of critical of 7. So when the remake was first announced, I was like, I'll probably play it. Who knows? Maybe updated graphics, voice acting, a better translation of the dialogue will get me into it. And then, of course, when they announced that there was going to be changes and all that, I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to play this. So, did Final Fantasy VII Remake change my mind on Final Fantasy VII? I'll let you know at the end of the video. So now, let's get into the meat of the review. Number 1, graphics. Now, I'm a type of person who, I don't care about graphics really. Whether the game is pixelated and looks old school, or whether it looks lifelike, or sometimes there's some PS4 games that look like they should have been on the PlayStation 3 or 2. As long as the gameplay is good, as long as it's not a buggy and glitchy mess, as long as I like the characters and all that, I'm happy. But oh my gosh, guys, the graphics in this game are gorgeous. I think this game looks better than Final Fantasy 15. Like, this almost makes 15 look like look like a PS3 game. And it was just, them being able to take the slums of Midgar and make them look pretty, make the slums look pretty. It was like, oh my gosh. And then there are times where you get a glimpse of what the world outside of Midgar looks like. And it's like, it makes you wish that part 2 of this remake was already out so you could experience what the rest of the world looks like, because it is just gorgeous. I mean, any time that I got like to look over like a vast area of Midgar during the game, I would stop and just look. It's just gorgeous. And the character models, like, even when it's just the character models for in-game conversations, where it's the basic models that that what you're controlling in battles and all that, they still looked amazing. And then for the high res cinematic scenes, it was like, I've got to hand it to Square. It may have taken them 5 years to put this out since they announced it, but man, I'm glad they took their time, because this game is gorgeous. It's probably one of the most gorgeous games out there right now. And the only other game I can see beating it and looks like that's coming out this year is maybe Cyberpunk 2077. But this game's gorgeous, guys. That's all I can really say about it. So in the graphics department, it's amazing. Number 2, battle system. Now, this one has caused a bit of contingency with the Final Fantasy fandom and the 7 fandom, really, and it's how they handled the battle system in the remake, because you've still got people who want Final Fantasy to return to turn-based, where you've got the other side who prefer the more action style that they went with, that they used in, say, Final Fantasy 15, and kind of like what they use in the Kingdom Hearts series. Now, what is interesting about this is that in Remake, they kind of catered to both audiences. You can play the standard action style, or you can choose what's called classic style. Now, I didn't play this one, but from the description of it, you pretty much put in the commands and the character does it. So, in a way, it kind of is turn based. Whenever I do a second playthrough, I'm going to at least give it a try, maybe one of the battle simulators or in the Coliseum and see how it plays. But to tell you the truth, I really liked the action system. Like, it really just, it was fluid. Each character felt different in their way of how they controlled. And whether I was, using Cloud or switching to Barrett or even switching to Aerith, it was fluid. And even though each character works differently, it wasn't a major shit, so much of a change that it threw me off. And it's weird. The ATB system is back, but instead of for like an attack, you have to let your ATB fill up to use magic, and you've also got to let it fill up to use items. So if you're playing on a too hard of a difficulty for yourself and you don't have any ATB bars, there will be some times where you're low on health and you can't use an item or you can't use a spell because you have no ATB bars. Limit breaks are pretty much the way like they were in the original. They fill up if you attack and they fill up if you get damaged. And the limit breaks are gorgeous in this game. Like, the cinematics for them is amazing. Each character only has 2 levels though in this one, but then again, this is only the first part of the game, so of course, you're not going to have their most strongest limit breaks right away. Summons work a little bit different this time around, where in the original you could just, pick summon, pick whichever one you wanted to summon, whatever materia you had equipped. Where this one, you've got to you have to sometimes wait for the summon bar to show up and it'll fill up. Most of the time when it would show up for me is if I staggered an enemy, and it will fill up, and then once it fills up you can select summon. But the summon will attack on its own, but for it to do a skill, it uses up your ATB as well. So you've got to have ATB filled up as well to have a summon do its attack. And whenever the summon meter runs out, the summon will do a big attack before it leaves. And the summons that are in this first part of the game are Ifrit, Shiva, the Chocobo and Moogle summon, Fat Chocobo, Leviathan, and Bahamut. Those are the summons that are in this first part of the game. Also, what they changed in the battle system is how you can switch to like, you can already switch different characters. Like, if you don't want to fight as Cloud in the actual battle, you can switch over to Tifa, you can switch over to Barrett, but also they made it to where you can use the L2 and R2 button, I believe it was, to switch over to another character real quick. If you want them to do a certain ability or use an item, they'll do it, and then you can switch back to Cloud, Barrett, whoever you were preferring to use. But yeah, the battle system was pretty fluid, and I actually liked it. Oh, also there's the stagger system. Now this is kind of like it's pretty much a similar system to what they used in Final Fantasy 13. If you attack a enemy enough times, a stagger meter will start building, and once they get staggered, they're weakened, they can't attack you back, and you can just put a lot of damage into them. And that's usually also, if you stagger an enemy, it fills up your gauge for your limit break as well. So that's a lot of the changes they made in the battle system. And to tell you the truth, I really liked it. It was really action packed, it was really fluid, and really easy to learn how to use. So yeah, the battle system gets a props for me. Number 3, music. So, what is one of the most important things in video games and in cinema that if you take it away, a scene loses some of its magic? That's the music. And Final Fantasy has always been known for its gorgeous music, and 7 is no exception. That's one thing from the original game that I really did like was its soundtrack, because there's some of those songs from the original game that you would hear and you automatically know where they're from. And happy to say, a lot of those tracks did return in Final Fantasy VII, and some tracks got reworked, like Sephiroth's theme. It's a bit different than what it was originally. Like, and there's been so many versions of that song. So it's kind of funny that they decided to make a new one for the remake. But there were many times where I would be walking around and the music just makes the situation of what's going on in the game that much more important. Or if I would hear a track that I remembered from the original, I'd be like, oh man, there's that one, you know. Or during a real big action scene and the music's just playing in the background. And I've always noticed that music in video games and in movies really gets you pumped. It gets you into the scene you're watching. It's like, how many times have you been watching a Marvel movie or like one of the Avengers movies and the Avengers theme starts playing during while they're fighting, and it almost makes you feel like you're an Avenger yourself. So that's what it does here, especially toward the end during the final boss fight. Like, it was like watching another fight scene from Advent Children, to tell you the truth. So yeah, the music once again, as are all in any Final Fantasy game, top scores for that. Number 4, characters. So I'm gonna go over the heroes, like the main ones, and none of the villains, none of the side characters. Pretty much, you know, Cloud, Tifa, Barret, and all them. So Cloud's not that much different in this than he was in any other incarnation. Now, it's been a long time since I've played the original Final Fantasy VII, and Cloud does go through a change over the course of the game. But at the end of this one, he's kind of already starting to go through that change. I'm not going to say what a lot of people say about Cloud and him being like an emo boy, but he seemed a lot more colder in this one at first than he was in the original. Maybe it's just because I haven't played the original in so long, but the change in Cloud is already starting by the end of it. He's more of a team player now by the end of it, where I think it took him a little bit longer in the original one. So really, to tell you the truth, that's the only big difference between the original and remake for Cloud goes. For Tifa pretty much came off the same as she always has been. You know, very caring, kind of a big sister, mother type of the group, but also very strong. The conflict that she had in the original game about being a part of Avalanche and causing all this by blowing up the reactors is still there. She's a bit more conflicted in this one, I think, than she was in the original one. The whole thing about her feeling trapped and all that. We also see a cute little side of her during a new part where we learn that she's kind of got a side of her that's easily spooked. So I don't think we've ever seen that for Tifa. So that was different, but she's also not as easy to make jealous this time around. Her and Aerith, well, I'll wait till the changes part in that. Barret is kind of the same Barret he always was, loud, obscene, quick to anger. He seems a bit more toned down than in the original, like, but he's a little bit toned down, but he's still the same. And he was really the comic relief in a lot of parts, which is typical Barret. Still, the strongest thing about Barret is, of course, being the leader of Avalanche, being this pro-planet activist in a way, and also being a loving, caring father to Marlene. And she is absolutely adorable in this remake. Like, she is cute as a button. And, so yeah, that's really all I gotta say about Barret, is that Everything that made him strong and a good character is still there. He's a little bit toned down as far as his outbursts and his cursing. But they're still cursing in this game. Even Cloud says a lot of curse words. Aerith does too, which she's next on the list. So it's officially no longer Aerith, because in the original that's what she was called. It is Aerith in this, and pretty much plays. She plays a slightly bigger role in this than the original. I don't have that many standout memories of Aerith, except the one thing that happens. But in this one, unless it's just from where it's been so long since I've played 7, but she seemed have a bit more of an attitude in this. Like, she came off a bit more flirty and a bit more smart mouthed. And this one, she's got an attitude to her, but she might have already had that. I just don't remember. And she came off way more stronger in this remake. Like, they just portrayed her to be a little bit more competent than just kind of like the damsel in a way. So I really like that. So, and plus the whole stuff with Carneo and all that, which is really one of the stronger parts for her. And just seeing her get upset by some of the things that are said was really cute. Red 13. Red 13 shows up, of course, toward the end of the game, because you don't run into him until they go to Shinra headquarters. He looks amazing. I love the voice actor that they got for him. He does join your party, but he's not controllable. So he pretty much acts on his own. Hopefully that's changed in the other parts, because he is pretty much a party member throughout the whole entire game after that. Maybe they just didn't have the controls and all that ready for him. So yeah, not much more to say about him, because like I said, he's not in the game all that much and you can't control him. He does give a lot of story, like lore and all that, once he shows up, which I'll get into the changes section. But yeah, I can't wait for future installments where he's actually playable. Next is Reeve, which we all know if you've played Final Fantasy VII. He is Cait Sith. So we see a little bit more of him, I feel like, in this one than the original. He's like really the only person that works at Shinra that cares about the people of Midgar and kind of knows that Shinra is not doing the right thing. And we do get a little glimpse of Cait Sith in the game after the Sector 7 plate falls. But other than that, I think he's in this a little bit. He's in this very little. I think Red 13 has more scenes than he does. But he is considered, he is a future party member and all that. So I thought I would include him here. He doesn't look much different than he did in past installments. He's pretty much the conscience of Shinra, really. Changes. Okay, now this is the big spoiler part. For most of the game, the remake is still pretty much the same game as the first part of Final Fantasy VII that takes place in Midgar, but we gotta remember, they took a part of the original that really is only about 6 hours and made it into about a 40 to 50 hour experience. So what changes did they make? Well, we knew during development and leading up to the release that they were going to change the story around. And the first big thing we saw was in trailers were these ghostly like wisps and all that, surrounding Aerith and Cloud when they first meet and all that. And we had no idea what that was at that time. Well, when you get Red 13, he lets you know that they're called whispers. And pretty much what they are, they make sure like whatever is destined to happen happens. They are pretty much there to make sure the remake does nothing different that the original did, if that makes sense. Pretty much. And like throughout the whole entire game, you see them either impeding Cloud and them, or even helping them, to pretty much make sure what happened in the original Final Fantasy VII happens in the remake. It's pretty much there to tell the remake, hey, this didn't happen in the original. You can't do this. And we also see that with, like, toward the end when after Sephiroth kills the president of Shinra, he also impales Barret. Well, a Whisper took most of the blow, and they healed him to make sure Barret doesn't die, because Barret did not die in the original. And also, Hojo. We all remember crazy Professor Hojo almost spills the beans to Cloud that he was never a soldier this early in the game, and the Whispers come and carry him off because Cloud's not supposed to learn that until much later. Well, here's where things get even more complicated. Sephiroth knows that this is an alternate timeline. He knows that in an alternate timeline, the original Final Fantasy VII, that he lost. So what does he do? He makes sure Cloud and everyone defeats pretty much the thing that controls the Whispers. And they do it. They kill it. And that gets rid of the Whispers. So pretty much, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 might as well not be a remake, because it no longer has to follow the original story. This opens up a lot of possibilities. And we see that toward the end, where it's hinted that Zack is still alive. We see that Biggs, who was supposed to die, is alive. We get a hint by her gloves on the table that Jessie is still alive. We don't know what happened to Wedge. And this also opens up, will they do the unthinkable and not kill Aerith? Will another character die? Will Tifa die? Will Barret die? And it's a great thing because it makes Part 2 unpredictable. We now do not know what's going to happen. If this game was following the original's story step by step, we would know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know now. And if it goes completely different, this makes Advent Children and all this other stuff that they've released before, it'll basically make it non-canon, because it can't happen anymore, because Aerith is dead in Advent Children. It just blew my mind when I realized that. It's like, oh my gosh, we're in new territory once Part 2 comes out. I mean, I'm sure there'll be things that still happen, but, like, there's also a lot of unknowns, and it makes me excited, really. Other changes. As I said earlier, Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie. In the original Final Fantasy VII, they were pretty much just there to be other members of Avalanche. You didn't really learn anything about them. In this, you learn a ton of stuff. You know, you learn more about Jessie's family. You learn more about what makes her, Biggs, and Wedge tick. You grow to care about them as characters, where in the original, you weren't given time. They didn't have a lot of screen time. Like, you just... And to tell you the truth, when I first played Final Fantasy VII, I didn't realize they had died until someone said something. Like, that's how little they were in the original. But in this one, they, my gosh, they made Jessie so thirsty for Cloud, it's not even funny. Like, she was trying hard. Cloud even asked her, are you that desperate? Which was kind of funny. But, so that's another big change, focusing on side characters that didn't get a lot of exposure in the original, get a ton in this. We have new characters that are made just for the remake. And of course, the inclusion of, technically the original Final Fantasy VII did have some side quests, but this one has more side quests that are more of this generation. Like, you talk to one character, they give you something to do, you go do it, and all that. The only problem I had with the side quests in this game, there's only 26, there's not like a ton, but some of them, it's like, go all the way to the other side of the map, then you gotta go to all the way to the other side of the map, and then some of them are not even marked. You just got to walk around and hope you see the side quest marker above a character's or an item's head. So I really wish they would add markers a little bit, because it just gets tiring after a while of just walking back and forth and looking for the same thing and can't find it. You know, it's some quest like looking for cats, or um, looking for treasure, but one of them's all the way over here, and the other one's all the way on the other side of the map, and the other one's in an underground lair, and all that. So, but they were still fun. I did all 26 of them. You get some good items out of them, but yeah, I just wish they were a little bit less infuriating sometimes. But that's my only gripe about the side quest. Another huge change was the whole cross-dressing portion of the game. And I remember when this remake was announced and they said they were changing the story, everyone was scared that they would cut this out. But they didn't. The biggest difference is you can do, depending on what quests you do and how much gil you're willing to spend, changes what kind of dress both Cloud and Aerith will wear. And then a choice earlier in the game determines what dress Tifa will wear, between the original dress she wore plus other two outfits that kind of, I guess I would say they're kind of like, I don't want to say what culture they represent, but pretty much you can get different combinations each time you play, depending on what quests you decide to do and what choices you make. So that was a bit different. There were some parts where an area was completely new, like there's before the plate in Sector 7 drops, Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith go through a haunted train yard pretty much that was not in the original. That's where you learn that Tifa gets easily spooked by creepy stuff, where Aerith is just like, let's go head on, and Cloud's just kind of stuck there in the middle of it. And speaking of Aerith and Tifa, another big change was they're not jealous of each other over Cloud. At least not yet. In the original, there was a lot of places, especially in the Midgar section, where it showed that Tifa was slightly jealous of how close Aerith was already to Cloud. Where in this one, they didn't really showcase it much. But there's a lot of... They took the time in this to show Aerith and Tifa bonding. And yes, the shipping community is going full swing with Tifa and Aerith, because Aerith makes a little thing about how her and Tifa are gonna go shopping, and Aerith says it's a date, because she says the same thing to Cloud earlier about it being about a date and all that. Which I'm all for it, It'd be funny if they did kind of slightly change it, but I don't think they're going to. There'd be a lot of people upset about that, and there's already people upset about the changes they made. It's almost like a lot of them would have paid $60 and more for the same old game, just with better graphics, and I don't agree with that. Because if I wanted to play the original one, I would have just played the original. This is more than a remake, really. It's more of a retelling, a re-imaging in a way. But yeah, it's just, I can't wait until the second part, where we go into the world, because I think it's going to be gorgeous. I'm curious how they're going to handle the world map. Are we going old school world map? Are we going open world, kind of like how Final Fantasy 15 did, which I would personally love? And what are they going to change? Like, the biggest bombshell would be that if Aerith doesn't die. And I got a feeling, based on some stuff that happened, that you see in the remake, that she might not. But you never know. You just don't know. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm glad that they're already working on the second part, but I just hope we don't have to wait another 5 years. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I can remember off the top of my head about, as far as changes go. So let's get to the score. So for the score of this review, I am going to give Final Fantasy VII Remake 10 out of 10. This was an amazing remake. It's pretty much like everyone has said about the remake of Resident Evil 1. This is how you do a remake. You take your time, you put a lot of love into it, you make changes to make it relevant, to make it a whole new experience, but you still keep the basic blueprint of the original. Like, I was blown away. Like, within 10 to 20 minutes of playing this, I was already into it. And so, here's that big question that I asked at the beginning of the review. Has Final Fantasy VII Remake changed my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII? The answer is yes. Though I still have a lot of problems with the original, and it's not aged well. I still think it's a little overhyped. So original Final Fantasy VII is still not very high on my list, but Final Fantasy VII Remake is definitely now in my top 5 favorite Final Fantasy games when 7 was outside of my top 5. Really enjoyed it. I'm actually invested in this story now. I actually care about these characters now, and I'm very, very excited to see where the remake goes, how many parts it's going to be, what things they decide to change, and what things they decide to keep the same. It's just, it blows me away. It blows me away that they took the first 6 hours of a 3-disc game and made it into a 40 to 50 hour experience. I clocked in about a little over 46 hours into this remake, and that's getting to the max level you can get to in it, which is level 50. Like, doing as much as I pretty much did every side quest. I did all the battle intel things. Like, I did everything I possibly could. Got all the weapons, maxed out the skills that they all had. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I would recommend it to anyone that likes Japanese RPGs, to anyone that likes action RPGs, to anyone that's a Final Fantasy fan. Whether you liked Final Fantasy VII originally or not, this remake will change your mind about Resident Evil Final Fantasy VII. Because, like I said, I was not a huge fan of 7 before I played this remake. Now, I love it. And I cannot wait till the second part. So that was my review of Resident Evil 7 Remake. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing this. I'm going to try and do more reviews of games in the future. And if you did enjoy it, please hit that subscribe button. We're very close to hitting 200 subscribers. Hit that notification bell so you'll get a notification for all of our future videos. Hit that like button because it really does help. Check the description for all our links to our Twitter accounts, our Patreon, our Etsy store, our Square store. Jess has been getting a ton of orders on her painted shoes and her masks, so head on over there and check all that stuff out if you're interested. Our email is there, just all that good stuff is there. So this is Kanan. Hope you enjoyed my review, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.